Welcome to Insights in Sound, where we talk to the people behind the scenes, behind the technology, and behind the music. People you may not know, but you should. And please check out getitInWriting.net/shows for a full list of our podcast YouTube series.
My guest is Candace Stewart. She is the studio manager of East West Studios. Let's just get right into it. You got a really kind of convoluted, checkered, interesting sort of history.
Are we starting from childhood?
Yeah, all those other stories too. Yeah, but you give the impression of being like a big city girl, and yet you are anything but.
Charleston, South Carolina is one of the largest cities in the state of South Carolina.
Yeah, which is...
And the most civilized and genteel city possibly in the United States. I'm just going to lay that down. But that said, yeah, I'm from the South, and what you may or may not know is I got started very kind of a roundabout way because I have 3 older brothers. And my 2 oldest brothers, you know, they had a rock band. In my hometown.
In South Carolina, that's yeah.
Hey, come on now.
Yeah.
So, but they opened for like the Allman Brothers and stuff. And my oldest brother, Rick, who's back in South Carolina now, still playing. My maiden name is Smith. Uh-huh. I know, he loves it. He's happy as a clam, living in the historic area. But my 2 older brothers, Rick Smith and Steve Smith. Steve's still an engineer. He lives in Seattle. Runs a program at Northwest University called Creatio. He's an amazing engineer, a scoring guy, and a studio designer. Anyway, so they came out to LA to follow, stardom, and then quickly ended up getting jobs as janitors at the record plant. They didn't even call them runners.
Well, but
Gary
at least they were in the door.
Oh, yeah,
That's all that matters. Yeah.
Rick got in the door. Steve is working at the photo mat. Which, by the way, apparently the photo mats in the 70s had some risque photos. But anyway.
Whoa.
So then Steve got in, and they both trained up there. And a lot of people that I work with still today, I met when I would come out and visit when I was in high school. So Mike Klink was on the desk, David Bianco, rest in peace. Jim Scott came later. Ed Cherney, Rose Mann, of course, was their boss. Chris Stone also, may he rest in peace. Al Cooper, a lot of people that I met, I'm like 16 and 17. And then I stayed in South Carolina and went to college for a long time. My mom was out here, my brothers were out here, and
and you stayed.
I stayed. It was, I had a great time, actually. I was a psych major with a business minor.
How perfect for the work you do now.
Absolutely perfect for what I do now.
Yeah.
So I came back out when I was about 26, and Steve had left the record plant. He'd been at Rusk for a minute as the chief engineer, which is still in business.
It's still
Elton
out
Ahi
there,
is the owner. He's great. Mm-hmm. And he took over a room at the old Kendon, which he called on Glenwood Place in Burbank, which is now called
Was that the
Glenwood
old Quincy
Place.
room?
It was the right-hand side, 619, possibly.
Ah, okay. I put a console in the old Quincy room.
Oh, on the right-hand side was 619, and on the left is 623.
This was in
the 80s.
This was called Entourage, was that right?
No, Entourage, Encore.
Encore, that was
Encore.
Encore
Is at the end of the block.
Okay,
Also owned by Kendon, as was Artisan in Hollywood. But this is the one that's closer to Clark.
Okay.
Off, if you know Burbank. It's now called Glenwood Place.
Yep.
Owned by Atlantic. Kit runs it, Kate Rubin, she's amazing. But he took over a room there, and it was called Take One.
Oh, sure.
And it was on the right-hand side, and she was a great engineer. We hired this guy who's a water delivery guy, Makasia Ryan. He ended up being the assistant, and I was learning to assist and helping my brother just in general. We were just him and I and Makasia. And I was learning basic assisting, and I did a couple things. I helped on a couple things. But pretty early on, I thought, well, if I can't be amazing, like I was, you'd see people like Shel Talmy, who's blind. Shel, if you listen to this, just know I think you're amazing. And, or Chubba Paytos, people like that. Brenda Russell, Piano in the Dark.
Sure.
Richard McKernan, God bless him. And I'm thinking, and everybody was super cool. I definitely want to dispel a myth that being a woman engineer was hard. It was not hard at all. It had nothing to do with gender.
No,
and
no,
it still
women were
doesn't.
Women were actually welcome.
Super welcome
Yeah,
and still
yeah.
welcome, obviously. But
But
had,
there are other issues.
Yeah, had nothing to do. I have never found that to be true. But that could be my personality and growing up with brothers maybe. But anyway, working with these cool guys and seeing all these amazing engineers and just realizing that I probably didn't have the electronics aptitude to be an incredible engineer. I asked my brother, I said, I have worked in bartending and worked in hotels and catering and stuff. And I said, why don't I help you book it? Why don't I help you sell it? Help you fill the rooms. And shortly thereafter, call came in from Mike Klink, who I still work with all the time. Love you, Michael. And it was, I got this record. It's already been recorded. There's no money. We have to re-record it. And it was Appetite for Destruction for Guns N' Roses. So that was a big thing. And then God bless him, Richie Zito came in with Heart and Cheap Trick. And so that was just really good experience for me. And Steve was, my brother's great. I love him dearly. They're all fantastic. My brother David also worked at the record plant. He lives here in LA. He's a photographer. Very talented, wonderful guy. Did a lot of pictures of Zappa. If you buy the Zappa box set from Universal, you will see the photo that my brother took on the box. So just a creative family. My mom was a painter and an artist. My father was an electrical engineer. And he worked for Lockheed. He died when I was really young. He died when I was 16. But he worked for Lockheed, and he built the safety systems for nuclear missiles on nuclear submarines.
Ooh, I hope
so
he was good.
a smart cat.
I hope he was good.
Yeah, he was real good. He used to tease me and say, I'm just trying to keep the Navy from killing us. But yeah, he was a super smart guy, and he would build amps for my brothers. They had bands. They'd tour around the Southeast. When they were really young, like play Navy bases and stuff, they were the shoresmen.
Ooh.
Then they were the High Price Spread.
Ooh,
then they
that's
were
nice.
Chariot.
Uh-huh.
And they had a nightclub when they were 18 called the Alice Underground on Folly Beach, which is a really beautiful beach in Charleston. And it was behind a surf shop. So needless to say, there was a lot going on in the 70s. And what I like to say to anyone who's listening to this, don't do drugs, give them to me. Because, don't do drugs. But yes, if you have some, you can give them to me. Anyway.
So let me bring you back here. Let me bring you back here and ask you this. Did you know that the job of studio manager even existed, or was this something that just kind of fell into place for you based on circumstances?
Well, I knew it existed because I had met Rose.
Okay.
And I had met Dee Willoughby, who'd been at the record
Rose,
plant prior.
Yeah, now Rose, I would venture to say, was never just a studio manager. Rose,
none of us
Rose
are.
is exactly, but I mean, Rose was among the first.
She wasn't just traffic.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, yeah. So
That's
you
what they
knew,
call it. They called it traffic when you did booking and scheduling.
right? But you knew there was a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, I mean, she ran the business, and that's what I've always done. From early on with doing all the payroll taxes and running a small business and running all the finances and doing all the books and stuff like that. And that's what I do now. I mean, I've always run the business for the people that I work for. God bless them. And yeah, Rose really set the tone. And Paula Salvatore, who was at Capitol
Paula's
for many
another one.
years.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The three of us, I somehow just ended up, having tenure from not doing anything else. We laughed about it the other day. Like, all of a sudden you're like, oh, wow, like you've been a studio manager for so long. It's like, well, I just never did anything else. And same for Paula, too, and same for Rose. We just love what we do. We love musicians. We love music. Paula's the only one of us that's a musician. Paula's a singer, and she plays guitar.
Well, Tina's a musician, too.
Well, yeah, Tina's a musician, too, but of me, Rose, and Paula, Rose and I are not musicians, and I think we're all fans and love facilitating musicians and just helping people, make records.
Yeah, I mean, you've been around it for long enough
Yeah.
that I think you can intuit a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, I was always a pretty good read of people prior, being a bartender, like I said. That's really excellent training, life training.
Yeah.
You want to learn about people, watch them when they're drinking. But, I've been really, really fortunate. The studio that I'm at now, East West, I ran it prior when it was called Cello.
Sure.
It closed in 2005, and Doug Rogers, the current owner, God bless him, I begged him to come and buy it. The building was in a state of disrepair. At the
Yes.
time that it closed, the previous owner, Rick Adams, he was a great guy, and it was part of his portfolio and just a small part, and he bankrupted it. And at the time, we thought that was terrible, but it ended up being the best thing that could have ever happened because it was in the receivership of the court. So all the gear and everything just stayed here sealed in plastic, still sealed. And, Doug bought it at auction, got a great deal, but then put a lot of money into it, as you have seen. And the building is, it's over 100 years old. So.
Oh, and this building has so much history. I mean, how do you not
it's well, and
preserve it?
and that, like, the village is a Masonic temple. This was a casino during the 1940s called Madame Zuka's. It was a grocery store at the turn of the century called Cash is King, and it was one of the first grocery stores that had meat and fish and produce all under one roof. I guess that was a rarity in 1905.
I guess.
So Bill Putnam, most of you can read a history on the website, if you want to know the history of 6000 Sunset. But first Western Recorders with Bill Putnam, with Frank Sinatra and Bing Crosby. Then Ocean Way, Alan Sides, Bill Putnam's protege, had 6050 and 6000, which was the United Building and the Western Building, and that became Ocean Way. We were together. And then in 1998, Rick Adams bought 6000. It became Cello. And I was brought here by the person who made a huge impact on my life, John Porter, who's English producer. I try to segue into this. When I left Take One, I walked across the breezeway to 623 South Glenwood Place when my brother moved to Seattle in 1989, and I took over Red Zone. And when I ran Red Zone, I worked for Dennis Dager. He's fantastic. He has a winery now in Paso Robles. He's a great guy, wonderful cat. And I'm in touch with him still. But when I went to Red Zone, I met John Porter. And John had just come off of a run doing all the Smiths. I love the Smiths. And he had done that song, 3 Strange Days by School of Fish.
Know it well.
Yeah, but he's a blues guy, hardcore blues guy. Friends with Clapton, he played bass in Roxy Music. He himself is an incredibly talented guitar player. So John and I became friends, and all the guys that work with me then, I'm still friends with Joe McGrath, who was an engineer there, Trent Slatton, who was an engineer there. So John, you meet those people in your life, and they change the trajectory of your life.
Sure.
And John called me up, and he said, I met this wealthy guy. He loves music. And John was working on a Taj Mahal record. I think he was in New Orleans. And he said, we want to buy a studio, and we're thinking about buying this building. And then they settled on 6000 Sunset. And I was, at that time, working at Sound Castle in Silver Lake, working for Buddy King. Mm-hmm. Great studio. It's still there. It's called Pulse now. It's private.
Yes.
On Rowena. Josh Abrams and Scott Keller have it. But John called me up and said, there was going to be a record company and everything. And he said, do you want to run it? And I said, yeah, because I knew about 6000 Sunset. I knew about this building. And there's no one in the industry that didn't know about these rooms at 6050 at United and Western. So, we were in awe because, these rooms predate, they go back to Gold Star. They go back to the 60s.
Yeah.
Capitol, Gold Star, these rooms. And then
there are very few studios
Very
left.
few studios from that time. Mm-hmm. The great rooms of the 70s still with us would be the Village, Sunset Sound, and some other great places.
What used to be A&M.
Yes, yeah, Henson, of course.
Of course, Cherokee's gone.
Cherokee's gone, but I think that Mr. Rob has another room.
Yeah, Bruce has moved somewhere over near Paramount, I think, if I remember
probably.
right. And he's probably got that one A range that was in the big room. Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting story because I have an A range here in Studio 3, and
that's
most people aren't aware.
That's the one from Studio 3 at Cherokee.
Yeah, it's from Cherokee.
I have worked on that board for so many years.
Yeah. So it's from Cherokee. So when John came here and we had cello, there was a different console in Studio 3. Studio 1 has the Neve that it's had since the Ocean Way days, which is two 8078s locked together. Studio 2 has the same, this is confusing, 8028, 8038 converted to 40 channels that's been in Studio 2 also since the 80s. And then in Studio 3 there was another Neve. And so that Neve went the way of all good things. And then there was an AMEC in there, and then Gary Meyerberg, who's my chief engineer, he and I took a second out on our houses during cello, and we bought an API that was amazing. God bless the guys from API. When cello closed, they repoed it held us harmless, which was awesome.
Yeah, Gary was the one who actually called me when you guys got the
Oh,
A
so
range.
exciting.
Because
So-
that's, there's only a few of those left in the world.
I think there's only 6 or 7 in existence that are running, and there was 13 built.
Yeah.
And the engineers at Trident Studios in London, the manager takes credit at Trident during that time, and I'm sure he had something to do with it. But the engineers at Trident, my understanding was that all the Tridents that were built at Trident Studios and shipped to the States were built for the Robb brothers. That was my understanding.
Would not surprise me.
For Cherokee.
That would not surprise me.
Pretty much any Trident A range that's in the States probably went through Cherokee.
Has been through Cherokee, yeah.
Yeah. So Gary restored that. My chief engineer now, Lawrence Malchose, he keeps everything rocking. He's the best. And so I came here with John in '98 and got to see all my old buddies again. I got to see Don Was again, who I'd met at Take One when I was 26 when he first came out from Detroit. And then Jim Scott was in residence in Studio 2 for about 7 years. A lot of work with Rick Rubin, God bless him. Just so many people, George Vakulias, and so many people. Those of you who are listening to this, if you think that there's been all these huge technological changes, there has certainly been advances. I say that tightly and skeptically. But the main thing that's really changed is that we use a computer instead of a tape machine. And we use tape machines all the time. We run 2-inch tape machines, we run half-inch tape machines. It's the same technology except for Pro Tools and the computers and the plugins. For my way of thinking, I'd rather you commit to the take and not have 1,000 million options and be able to edit.
Yep.
But that's just me, and make sure that your performance is up to par.
That's so old school.
There's a concept. Wow, you actually did it
But let
right.
me ask you about that, because you bring up something really interesting.
Touchy. It's
Yeah,
touchy.
well, I know, and I understand that, but, it has changed the creative process, and it has changed the way that people use a commercial studio. So how
Sure.
does that impact you now, where you have to think about shorter bookings, you have to think about things swimming from place to place and stuff like that?
Since the 90s, the home studio, home studios have been on the rise, and I'm all about artists.
80s. Remember
80s.
HARP?
Yeah, I said 80s. Yeah, the HARP.
yep.
Hollywood Association of Recording Professionals.
Oh, yeah.
I met a lot of people at those meetings. Anyway, that I'm still friends with.
So did I.
Including Buddy Brendo, right? But really, truthfully, running a commercial facility like this, I can't really be worried about that. You know what I mean?
No, I'm not saying you should be worried, but I'm saying how has that changed your work?
Well, it's radically changed it. Again, all about artist empowerment, people being able to do stuff at home. We're owned by a software company that allows composers to do mock-ups and stuff at home, God bless, East West Sound. So all about that. But it's really changed, and you hit the nail on the head. What it's really changed, instead of people having the luxury of booking 6, 7, 8 months to do a record. By the way, video killed the radio star. I would like to point that out. Because when video came into play,
she said, pointing at the
and
video camera.
video budgets took away the miscellaneous part of the recording budget, which we'll tell you about that later. But they also
You're not bitter or anything.
They also cut recording budgets. But anyway, what happens now, instead of having to know 6 people, 6 busy producers, you got to know 50.
Right.
And people come in for 2 or 3 days. A long booking is 2 weeks. Now, I am blessed because I've got people, Ryan Hewitt, and thank God to Rick Rubin and the Chili Peppers. They booked 10 months last year for the records that are coming out that you're hearing. Mark Foster, who I frickin' adore. Won't go into detail on what Mark Foster's doing, but he's very loyal, is all I'm going to say about Mark Foster. He's incredibly talented. And I'm very lucky because sometimes people will come and they'll stay for a couple months. But yeah, a week-long booking is a long booking now.
But it's always, the thing that's always kind of hurt is that we've lost this kind of sense of community, of people running into each other in the lounges.
Oh yeah, you just keep
like
hitting all the hot spots for sure. Yeah, I mean that's one thing that I'll say, and I think anybody that works in a commercial facility or saves up their pennies to come in. And by the way, anyone can come. Me and Tina joke about this when we do panels. If you can pay, you can come in. It's not just labels. You don't have to be a millionaire. If you're an independent artist, I'll do everything I can to work with you. But yeah, because we want you to make records. And I always point out that everybody makes a first record. Everybody has a freshman effort. the Beatles, etc.
What do they say? Start ugly, but start.
Well, yeah,
Right?
just get it, just start, right? Yeah. And you've got to come in, you got to make the record. So if you want to do your demos at home in your home studio and then you come to a place like this, what will happen is a hip hop artist sees the cellist sitting in the lounge. And the way that that Doug redesigned East West to the lounges and everything downstairs and the changes that he made with Philip Stark, the designer, was he wanted a village community feel. Mm-hmm. So each room has its private lounge, but then there's large communal areas. And what happens, and everyone who's worked in a commercial facility at Henson, Village, whatever, part of the groove is running into people in the hallway.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to hear a really cool story? Yeah. People that are involved in this story may deny it, but I was there. So Mick Jagger was working on the soundtrack for Alfie with Dave Stewart, and he was in one room. Motley Crue was here in Studio One. Audio Slave was in another room, and Nikki Sixx had wanted to meet Chris Cornell. So early in the day, I introduced them to each other, so that happened at noon or something. Later on in the afternoon, Mick calls me and says there's a bunch of paparazzi outside, and there was a manual gate. He said, please come and open the gate. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. So I run out and I open the gate. I'm like, what are all these I go, no one knows you're here. This is so crazy. I don't know why these paparazzi are here. He comes in, he's standing in my office, everything's safe, and we hear, coming out of Studio One, we hear, I think it was Street Fighting Man. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So I buzz into the control room, and I'm like, are you recording? And he says, no, we're just messing around. So Chris Cornell is in Studio One with the Motley guys, and they're just having fun. And I walk into the live room with Mick Jagger.
How perfect.
And
we got a mic set up for you right here.
And Chris can't see him because Chris is facing the glass. I'm pretty sure it was Bob Rock. Jaw drops from the control room. And the band stops playing. Chris is still singing because he can't see what's happening. And he turns around and Mick claps. And he goes, I sanction this version. And he looks at Chris Cornell and he goes, not bad.
Ooh.
Yeah, that was a fun day. So that's the kind of thing that happens in the pinch me moments that happen. I rarely interact with the clients, to be honest with you. I've talked to their managers and stuff, but I don't go into the studio. It's I'm not part of the production. I don't, unless someone asks me to come in and say hi. But it's really, I'm not one of those people that barges in, even though I have a large personality. I don't inflict it on the artist. I stay in my room. I stay in my office.
They're paying for a service.
Exactly.
And part of that service is to leave
left
them
alone.
to their creativity.
Yeah, be left alone. Make sure they have what they need and then give them their privacy.
Yep.
Obviously, we know artists are sensitive and you got to keep vibe. It's all about vibe. It's all about keeping a good vibe. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But, yeah.
So for you, in this day and age, in this challenging time, you can't go back, right? So you've figured out how to make the most out of the situations you have.
And I never like to see any place closed, but we've lost a lot of good rooms. And yes, we're busier, but you think we'd be even busier than we are, and we're not, which is indicative of, that's not good to me. I want the industry to be healthy. And I know a lot of music has come. I know there's a lot of records being made. You young artists that are listening to this, just know that an acoustic space and great mics and great engineer. I got to shout out to the engineers. They're the unsung heroes of everything you've been listening to for all of our lives. Yep. They've made the soundtrack to my life, your lives, and they're not going anywhere. You don't get on a plane without a pilot, okay?
And that's the reason I do this show, because there are so many unsung heroes, no pun intended, who are behind the making of all of these great recordings.
I am
that.
such a huge fan of engineers, producers. Obviously, without musicians, none of it happens. But so what I've chosen, because I'm pretty much a positive person, is just that I make new contacts. I don't rest on my laurels. I reach out. I just reach out to people. I mean, my marketing, if you know me, anybody who knows me knows that my way of marketing is to invite you over for a drink or a meal. So that's just my nature. That's how I am. So I'll have people come. I have small happy hours. And in those happy hours, the artists, if they're done for the day, will come out and meet people they never met. Jeff Emmerich came to one time. You never know who's going to show up.
Sure.
I'm so lucky. So there'll be new artists, new engineers, people just starting out, and they'll meet, maybe they'll meet an idol, or they'll meet a hero, somebody that they've read about. That's the plan, is to make everybody happy and play nice together.
So you get, obviously, a new generation of interns in all the time.
Yeah.
The people you get in now, right? Like when we were coming up.
It's like
a lot of these
Groundhog Day for
yeah.
me.
Except,
Yeah.
what I think is interesting is that, like, when we came into the studio, right, we didn't know.
There were no
really,
schools.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah,
now
not really.
Now you're getting more qualified interns to a certain extent. How is that? Does it play differently or not?
I work with a couple schools, so I have to shout out to the schools, and I have to say God bless Blackbird Academy and John McBride in Nashville, people who start recording programs who actually understand making records.
Yep.
Okay.
One of my favorite places.
And back when we started, where A&R people were involved in production and knew how to make records. Okay. So you A&R people, get it together,
Right.
go to a session,
Exactly.
see how a song is recorded.
Yep.
Get down to it and get that feeling. But the Conservatory of Recording Arts and
in Phoenix.
Sciences in
Another great one.
Phoenix and Tempe.
Yep.
Kurt Ham runs that school. He's had it for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go out there and I'm going to see them at NAMM this weekend, actually. But their key thing is that they talk to professionals like you, like me, engineers, producers, when they built their curriculums.
Yep.
So when they built their curriculums, they built it from people who knew, who know how to make records. And the etiquette, for my part, it's the etiquette of how to behave in a room and stuff like that. I'm not an engineer anymore. But so the new people I get and the interns that I take on, Emerson has a program, Full Sail has a program, MI here, the LA Recording School, and all of them, I will give them credit. They do reach out to try to find out what I'm looking for, and it hasn't changed. The trajectory is you start as an intern, unpaid intern, only for about a month. I don't believe in slave labor. But you have to do it usually an internship for academic fulfillment. And it's kind of like a dating period. I figure out if you're going to actually cut it or not. And I try not to bring anyone on as an intern that I'm not going to have a runner position for. Then it's the runner. Then you become an assistant engineer. And then my goal is that you become a first engineer and you've launched. And you come. So I'm secretly just creating a factory of my future clients. Because, Ryan Hewitt, God bless him, books the Chili Peppers for 10 months. He's a cello alum, so, and all these people over the years that have worked for me that come back and book time. Brendan Nakora, Chris Kahn. I mean, so many people, if I forget your name, don't be upset. Ken Sluter, so many people. God bless them. And I've always tried to treat the alum you want to treat everyone fantastic. But I think what happens sometimes when alum come back to their home studio, they might not get like the best treatment. And I think
Really?
I try to do the opposite. I try to make sure they're, you take for granted that they know the rooms and you give them a green you give them a green assistant. I'm not saying I don't give them a green assistant, but I try to make sure that they have what they need because these are my clients.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, and God bless them. So, what's different? What am I allowed to say on this show?
You can say anything you want. You can drop your F-bombs, do whatever you want.
Okay, great. This is important.
Okay.
My favorite word is fucktard. Okay? And what that equates to for me in the current vernacular would just be a generation, and you hear this. I think my grandparents thought my parents were lazy. My parents thought we were lazy. Okay?
Of course.
So I'm sure
in
every
my day,
every
uphill in the
generation.
snow,
we
both
walked
ways,
to snow
right.
and
Yeah,
broken glass.
yeah.
We walked to school in broken glass. But I will say the schools help weed out this sense of entitlement. That's a good thing, ideally.
Sometimes it makes it worse.
Sometimes not, makes it worse. Depends on the school and how expensive the school is. I think that people listening to this, if you really want to get into this business, you got to love music. You know, if you read music, all the better. Chord charts, all the better. But you don't have to be a musician. It is the most incredible blend of art and science that I've ever seen. I mean, to be an assistant engineer is one of the hardest jobs. It's one of the most thankless jobs. No one cares about your opinion. No one cares who you know, what you know, where you've been.
Yep.
And that hasn't changed because you are there to help. You are there to be in the background, to anticipate the needs of the engineer. The other thing is that people think somehow like, oh, I'm going to be an engineer and I'm not going to have to answer to anybody, or I'm going to be a producer. The producer answers to the artist.
Absolutely.
The first engineer answers to the producer. You will always be subordinate to the music and to the artist. So if you're not good at that, you probably aren't going to really be great at this job, at any of these jobs. Because if you can't sublimate your ego for the betterment of the music and the betterment of the recording session, your job as an assistant is to keep the momentum of the session rolling, to troubleshoot on the fly, to ease tension, you know, et cetera. The first engineer, he's got his hands full too, you know.
Your job is to be invisible.
It's to be invisible
Yes,
and to be
not
helpful.
Disturb, yeah, we're a service industry. Your job
Oh my
is
God.
to assist the creative process.
Yeah, it's called an assistant.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
You know?
But we are all, I mean, each of us, all these people you
Yeah.
named, all the roles you're naming, producer,
Yes.
engineer, we are all, as you say, we submit to the music.
Absolutely.
It's all about the music, it's all
Yeah.
about the song, and
Yeah.
if we're not there adding something,
Yeah.
then we should be quietly staying out of the way.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love my staff. I have a great crew currently. I'm a benevolent dictator, you know, but I lose my temper occasionally because it just, I'm not a parent. I don't have children, so my maternal instinct has been completely fulfilled for the past 35 years with all these young people that work for me.
I bet.
And the things that people do just blows my mind, the stupid shit that people do. And it's innocent, you know, but I have to remember that, you know, they came up in the 80s or the 90s, and now the kids that work for me were born in the 2000s.
Isn't that scary?
You know, it's like, what? Like the other day, I was like, what year were you born? They were like, I was playing Elton John in my office, and Love Lies Bleeding was coming out of the Echo, out of the Amazon Alexa thing. And this kid says, oh my God, that's so amazing. Who is that? And I said, it's Elton John. And he said, from what year? And I'm like, about 1973 or 74. And he goes, wow, he was really good. And I said, he still is. And yes, he was amazing and still is. But I forget that their, you know, their musical exposure, you know, their parents and now their grandparents.
Yep.
You know, is so different. And,
Well, you know, what's interesting to me, I taught college for a year.
oh Lord.
And I realized the first couple of days that I'm talking to people who have not only that they have never lived without the internet, that they've never lived without
Dude,
computers.
they're post CD,
but-
brother.
Yeah, but you know what's really amazing about it is that so many of them have not been in a band. And therefore they can't relate to ensemble playing.
Right.
And that is...
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah, and that is weird because that's what the studio's
They're
all about.
isolated.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, there's, you know, well, Billie Eilish has Phineas, but there's plenty of people making music by themselves. Tame
Sure.
Impala, who I love.
Sure.
A lot of people. And again, the technology allows for people to be creative at home alone, and I'm all about artist empowerment. But like you said, what you miss is acoustic spaces that color your music positively, great microphones, great
And that
engineers.
interplay between the
Interplay
musicians.
between
That's the
people.
big thing, I think.
That interplay between people and happy accidents that
Yeah,
happen
yep.
in the studio.
Yep, exactly.
You know, maybe, you know, I don't advise writing the studio, even though I love for you to do that because it takes up a lot of time. like video games and pinball and foosball. But I would say that there is times when, you know, arrangement gets changed on the fly. We do a lot of scoring. You know, there's 4 rooms here. Studio One is large, one of the largest non-sound stage recording studios left in LA. And so we do a lot of scoring. And those of you who are going to USC Thornton or UCLA or pursuing film composing, you're going to need a place like mine, because you're not going to be able to have, you can use the software for your mock-ups, but you probably won't use that in the finished product. You could, but you're not going to be able to do a 30, 40, 50, 60 piece orchestra in your house unless your mom's got a really big house.
Damn.
So you're going to need a place like me, like East West or any of these larger rooms. But yeah, we're really diverse. That's another thing that's always been kind of interesting about these studios, 6,000, 6050. Really, we're not
So
typecast
many.
by genre.
No, not at all. There's
And
so
a lot
many
of
different
places
kinds
are.
of music. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We do a lot of hip hop, we do a lot of rock, we do a lot of jazz, we do a lot of big band, a lot of scoring, which I mentioned, a lot of pop.
And that takes really knowing how to deal with people, because there's a lot of different kinds of personalities there.
Yeah, it's very different. And I think it's really good for the interns and the runners here, because they do get exposed to different types of production, the timing and the bead that happens on a scoring date, a union date, and that, that setup, that mindset is very different from a hip hop date. Nothing is ever allowed to not start on time. Mm. That's fundamental. Mm-hmm. But the vibe and the groove and the flow of the sessions are very, very different. My favorite, and again, shout out to Mark Foster, my favorite, or Sean Everett, or anyway, my favorite thing to see is to walk into like any of the rooms here and see like the Foo Fighters did this too, like station setup where there's keyboards, there's multiple drum sets, there's a percussion setup over here, and you've got people running, either musicians manning each station or people running from station to station experimenting and doing stuff, overdubbing and going, oh, you know what? I'm gonna, Brian Wilson, I'm gonna add a theremin.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
You got
I'm gonna add sleigh bells.
Yeah, you got there's gonna be a goat.
Yep.
But you've got the wrecking crew and those incredible session players, and there's still tons of session players. There's young ones now too, great ones.
And some of the old guys are still.
Chuck Berghofer. One of the best bass players of all time.
Dean Parks is still
dude. Greg Fillinganes, Nathan East. We just had an event for the anniversary of the parent company, and God bless Nathan East. He put together a band that was off the hook.
I believe it.
And everybody, the runners, the people in their 20s that came, the hip-hop artists, IDK opened. He's a very well-known hip-hop artist. He's amazing. Mm-hmm. He has a jazz thing that he does now called Sector 202.
Cool.
And it was super, super cool. And musicians are musicians, and they speak a language that is so much above politics or race or gender or anything else. God bless.
Yep.
Because you've got people of every generation talking to each other, because at that point in time, they're all musicians.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that is the common denominator. And that's very heartwarming.
It is. It is. It's really a pleasure to be able to be so deeply involved in
my God.
creativity.
It's a privilege. And I say that, I pinch myself. I mean, I love what I do for a living. I was making fun of the younger generation. Sometimes I get exasperated with the kooky things that happen, but just silly common sense
Our
things.
parents did that with us too.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Someone asked me the other day, they're like, what was the picture on the back of the bleach bottle? And I'm like, it's a skull and crossbones. And they go, what's that for? And I go, it denotes that it's poison and you don't drink it. Like, why do I have to tell you that?
Wow.
Don't drink bleach, okay? Just drink bleach.
So on that note, I actually want to wrap with a question of what would you advise younger people coming in at this point? What do you tell 15-year-old you now? Because the world's totally different. The industry's totally different.
Listen to as many records as you can. On Spotify, wherever you go to stream music, however you obtain music. If you can get a hold of some vinyl, read the liner notes. That's where you'll see the engineers, the producers, and the people behind the scenes. Read about these people. Research these people. Listen to as much music as you possibly can, and know that when you get your foot into a place like this, keep your mouth closed and keep your ears and your eyes open. Keep your head on a swivel, because everything that's happening around you, taking the food order, et cetera, et cetera. My 15-year-old self, I would say, study harder. Go to a recording school. They are valuable and valid. And just learn as much as you can about the history of music and about people who've made music over the past 100 years. Don't limit yourself to a genre. You know, study classical composers. Check it all out. Mm-hmm. Figure out what you like, but open up your mind to genres that you may never have been exposed to, because that is what's going to make you good at your job, in my opinion.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Candace Stewart, thank you for being my guest.
It was great. Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
Hey, I'm Daniel Keller. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us each week for Insights in Sound.